So we're back at Into the Abyss, and now is the time where we're going to tell you about the books that we've been reading. And
eat cookies.
Book review, and we've also cookies too as well. Why don't we have Chuck go first this time? What books do you have to recommend? Chuck has a very late October read for us, but that's okay. Go ahead.
So flashing back, we talked about Halloween reads in October, and I remember you, Kevin, saying, "Oh, we forgot Dark Harvest." I was actually thinking about doing Dark Harvest in November, and then we didn't record in November. Yes, it's perfect for October, but just read this book. So I'll just put this out there. Dark Harvest, just go read it. It's phenomenal. It's also short, so it's also easier to read.
And can I see that for a second?
Mm-hmm.
So Dark Harvest is, when we were talking about earlier tonight about tropes, this is a perfect example of a person who loves the Halloween tropes, loves the tropes of small town horror, but is also going to do something original with it. It takes place in a small town.
It's like Hunger Games at Halloween.
Yeah, it's got your typical. It's also got a nice. If you're not familiar with with Norman Partridge, you really need to check out his work. He's one of those authors where you're like, this guy does not write nearly as much as I would love him to.
I'm one of those readers who loves great prose. I love to be stopped.
I'm looking for prose now.
I will sometimes just stop. I did it recently when rereading Ray Bradbury, where I was just like, I can't believe that sentence was written. This is just so gorgeous. Norman Partridge is phenomenal. His writing is top notch. So if you're more into that kind of literary horror, definitely read this. The premise of the story, let me explain.
Yes, because I'm looking for a passage that I want to read.
So they resurrect the October Boy, a pumpkin-headed, jack-o'-lantern-headed creation that everyone hunts down, and they starve all the teen boys. I think it's like 17 and 18-year-olds.
So they're hungry.
So they're hungry. They will starve them for days, so that they're desperate for food and willing to do anything. And they send them out as part of a tradition to hunt down the October Boy, and the October Boy is trying to survive and cross the line to get through all these boys hunting them down, and it's just a violent, fun, just romp through the town. But it's so beautifully written, and the perspective jumps around. It even includes the October Boy, the Jack-o'-lantern Boy, as one of the characters.
It's a masterful blending of first-person narrator, ghostly narrator, talking to an audience, and then you have third-person narration on the inside. It's really, really, really wonderful done.
For the writing, I mean, this is as tough as it gets. This is top-notch type stuff here. This is the kind of stuff I hope to write. Honestly,
picture, if you will. Hey, here we go. Picture, if you will, the flip side of a game played by a pack of teenage hoodlums in a rusty Chrysler. It's a solo B-side for a thing born in a cornfield, a requiem for the shambling progeny of the black and bloody earth, because the October Boy has his own game. It's played with pitchforks, its switchblades, and fear, and its first scrimmage is set to begin on the quiet strip of two-lane that marks the midnight trail to town. For this creature with the fright mask face is both trick and treat. He comes with pockets filled with candy, and he carries a knife that carves holes in the shadows. And his race will take him from a lonely country road to an old brick church that waits dead center in the middle of a town square in the Twilight Zone. Also, brand new news.
Becoming a movie.
Getting a movie adaptation.
So I am stoked for that.
Yeah.
So I mean, Norman Partridge is just his prose just dances. It's so well done. So Dark Harvest, read it. It's so good.
Go ahead, sir.
All right. Well, this is not something I'm reading now, because unlike these two, I actually have a different job in terms of reading historic novels. But one thing I like to do is, especially if I have long car trips ahead of me, is get books on, well, we say books on tape, books on CD, audiobooks, maybe that's the way we're looking for. And one I did many years ago was the classic Bram Stoker's Dracula. Now, this came out in 1897.
Did you get the one with multiple actors?
Actually, I think it was just one.
Okay.
So, yes, it was a little weird to have the same guy be both a woman, then an old German doctor,
Yep.
then an Eastern European.
Well, what I was saying is I
vampire.
also did the audiobook for it, and there's one with Tim Curry who's in it.
Oh, well, I mean, that's
great.
good right there. Now, first of all, I know this is weird to bring this up, but, you have to look at what the movies are compared to the book. And the book itself is set, of course, it's in the Victorian age, came out in 1897. And I would like reviewers to stop referring to it as written by a mad, drunk Irishman. I don't think Bram Stoker was loaded when he was doing this. It was a very well written. Now, it's an epistolary.
Good effort.
Epistolary.
A for
There
effort.
we go, epistolary.
There you go. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Epistolary is actually used, it's told by use of several documents. Letters and diary entries, especially by multiple characters in the book itself, of Dracula, an Eastern European count, and of course he's a vampire, who, after he does a business deal with Jonathan Harker of England, is moving to England to essentially look for a new hunting ground, for lack of a better word. And of course, this also introduces us to Abraham von Helsing, his ultimate enemy, and it's a very good book. As I said, it's really good for long rides. When I do long rides, I either like mysteries or horror when I'm doing it. And God forbid you get to one of those scary spots, like, oh, okay, woke me right up. Thank God I'm driving for quite some time. And of course, it really is a period piece. And when I was looking over all the information concerning this, because you're going to have other experts and English professors jump in here about what everything represents, they were talking about just the Victorian age of everything from colonialism to race mixing, and they also said latent homosexuality. I don't know exactly where in the book they were bringing that up, but it has a lot of the good tropes, and of course when there are so many movies about it, some are honest to it. I think the one that's closest to it being honest, I don't know if it was 1992 or 93, Bram Stoker's Dracula starring Gary Oldman as Dracula. That was the closest, because they brought up the three suitors for Lucy. They talked about the fight against the monster. And, of course, they added in one of our favorite tropes, the issue of Christianity. Mm-hmm. And one thing that was actually very interesting, of course, most who may know, it's based on Vlad the Impaler.
Mm-hmm.
And if you actually look at history, that's one of my favorite tropes, is just the evil men can do to each other. Vlad, in of himself, is not an evil person, but to him, he was protecting his country from the invasion of the Ottoman Turks. And the Turks themselves were just as worse as Vlad, when they were essentially sending messages to each other. In one instance, when Turkish missionaries refused to remove their turbans when they went to speak to Vlad, he had them nailed to his head. And of course, one of his favorites is to impale his victims. And if you don't know about impalement, it's not stick a spear through you and then haul you up. It is hold you down, put that spear where the sun don't shine, hold it up, and let you unwillingly work your way down it.
Let gravity work its magic.
And I think that's... And some stories got around that Vlad started to... Well, they started saying that he was eating meals while he saw his impalement victims dying, and then, of course, they started eating them, drinking their blood. It's a good story. I hope that does not insult anyone who is from Romania, from Transylvania, Pennsylvania.
No, we do want to insult you. Pennsylvania.
No.
We're like 5 miles from Pennsylvania.
But just like when I did with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, sometimes go with the classics. Kevin?
Okay, so I have a ton, so I'll try to move through them quickly.
Actually, just jump on
Yes.
Bram Stoker's Dracula real quick. One, I will say, I've also done the audiobook for it, and I had read parts of it a long time ago. It holds up really well for a horror story. Like, it's actually genuinely scary, which most stories I read 100 years old are interesting, but not necessarily scary. Dracula holds up. It's very good. If you've read Dracula and you're interested in going further, I highly recommend Dracul. Co-written by J.D. Barker and Dacre Stoker, the descendant of Bram Stoker. It has that similar style. So if you enjoyed Dracula, there's a good chance you'll enjoy Dracul.
I would also recommend The Historian by Anna Karnoff. Well, I got it wrong. The Historian is also another good look at the Dracula myth. So
Yep.
Okay, so I have a couple things here. I've got 2 contemporaries, 2 classics, and a nonfiction that was inspired.
1 second.
He's preparing. He's like, oh, I need some fortitude here.
There we go.
Okay, so my very first one, just read this summer, and unfortunately, I was hoping to get this done quicker, but I had that whole foot surgery thing, and it really kind of threw the anesthesia fog really threw my reading off for about a good month and a half. But it was Devil's Creek by Todd Keisling, which really we were planning on having him as a guest on the show. And then something happened that day. I don't know what it was. We weren't really prepared for it. So we definitely want to have Todd as a guest in the show. I mean, this is a lot of people throw the terms around, small town horror like Salem's Lot. And usually when they throw that around, you're like, okay, really? It's really, really, really good. Okay, it's the idea about these kids that were all part of this cult. With this cult leader, that was a Christian minister that unfortunately he got swayed by an evil ancient, not really Lovecraftian. It's not really Lovecraftian, but that whole vibe of an ancient evil that or an ancient force that exists before everything else, and all the kids are siblings or half siblings because the pastor had quite a few. He had quite a harem in the church, so he sired all these like half siblings, and then years later,
I bet he was Baptist.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, no, I think Todd he's definitely dealing with a very small religious, a very religious cloistered town. And this offshoot.
These shots have been fired for months now.
Yeah.
If this is the only video you've watched, it's been a back and forth thing. So
But anyway,
having fun with this.
Anyway, it's a great, great novel. To try to do the summary of it would do justice. All I can say is that, like, right at that, like, the moment when he was supposed to be summoning their god, a group of people in the church revolted. They saved the kids. The kids have gone on to their own lives. And when you're talking about tropes, this is a trope that can be either well done or not. The old coming back home to face our demons. Our main character who has gone on to be a gothic artist, who like does covers for horror novels and graphic novels and things like that. He comes back and he's got to face all of this. And what the reason why the Salem's Lot comparison is an apt comparison is one of the great thing about Salem's Lot is the way Stephen King Salem's Lot is almost worse than the vampires that are in Salem's Lot. And he gives you this great overview of all the people in this town. And Todd Keisling does something very similar. And it's not a vampire novel, so when we're comparing it to Salem's Lot, we're not comparing it to that, but we're comparing to giving this a swath of a small town and giving all these people who are stuck in this small town like distinct personalities. So I would say go read Devil's Creek by Todd Keisling, and we hope to have him as a guest on this show. The next contemporary novel, which I'm not quite done with yet, but I'm just going to go ahead and recommend it anyway, is Come to Dust by Bracken Macleod. He also wrote the wonderful novel called Stranded, which is just a great speculative fiction, supernatural, Twilight Zone, time travel, alternate reality. Stranded is just beautiful. But Come to Dust is a new twist on The Revenant. The Revenant, the zombie, not really zombie, but coming back from the dead. But the novel is really not about the phenomenon, but how we deal with the fallout of that phenomenon. We got this one main character named Mitch, who he's an ex-con. He's trying to make his life, trying to do something positive with his life. And then his sister flakes out, dumps her daughter on him, and takes off and disappears. So now he's been trying to care for his niece, realizing that very much a father-daughter relationship is developing. And of course, the Revenant's, his daughter, dies in a tragic accident. Now she comes back to life. But now you can imagine, you've got some ultra-religious groups calling it a miracle, some ultra-religious groups calling it a work of the devil. And we were talking earlier today about the trope of painting Christians in a bad light. Mm-hmm. And that is a trope. It can be a little heavy-handed sometimes.
Low-hanging fruit, I would say.
Well, it can be. It definitely can be. But when it's done well, for example, in both Devil's Creek and Come to Dust, Bracken Macleod and Todd Keisling are not just swinging at all Christians. There's a very specific type of Christian. And to be quite honest, in some of the things that have happened in the last year, in some of the developments that I would have to say, as far as that, as a Christian, I enjoyed both of these novels immensely, and I didn't feel like they were swinging at low-hanging fruit. I felt like it was being very honest about, this is the dark. So these guys aren't lambasting Christianity in general. They're saying, here is the dark side of fanatical, and they're both just very, very well done.
I like that phrase, swinging at low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. So here are my classic recommendations. The first one is, and we were talking about this earlier because we started talking about Blood Vessel. The first one is The Night Boat by Robert McCammon, a very early Robert McCammon novel. I mean, German U-boat with undead German soldiers who get resurrected years later, and they want to continue their mission. I mean, that pretty much sums it up.
Nazi zombies.
Well, and they're not
zombies.
like slow-moving zombies. They've just been reanimated with all their. So The Night Boat's a great movie. So the next one is Phantom by Thomas Tessier, and the reason why I'm doing this is because I took a direct inspiration from this book for a novella that I just finished involving spiders and spider webs. But Phantom is a coming-of-age novel about this young boy, and they move to like a coastal town, and he basically, it's a coming-of-age novel where it comes to an understanding of death, and the haunting realization that maybe the hereafter is not a paradise, that maybe the hereafter is something looming and awful and meaningless. And it's a great novel. It's very well written. Thomas Tessier is another one of those authors where you wish he'd written more. But Phantom by Thomas Tessier. My nonfiction choice, just because we've been talking about tropes in Christianity and horror and the priest trope, is Sacred Terror, Religion and Horror on the Silver Screen by Douglas E. Cohen.
Hold up more.
What's that?
Yeah, hold
Hold
up
up more.
Well, I'm going to do screen caps of the images anyway over it, so it's not like
Yeah, but you gotta sell it.
sell it.
There you go.
So I actually bought that book several years ago when I was doing an essay. I was doing basically a graduate thesis on the philosophy of horror, and it's a really good book.
Philosophy of horror?
Well, there's also a great book called The Philosophy of Horror by Noel Carroll, which is just astounding. And I lent it to my niece, and she never gave it back to me. But anyway, it's a great book that looks at the I'm going to say it wrong.
Iconography.
Yeah.
Iconography.
How religious icons are used in horror films. But it was talking about how some horror films, the religious element is very important to the film. Like, for example, The Exorcist and Exorcist 3, where that grappling of faith is so very, very important. But in some films, it's just boiled down to, here's a cross. Vampire. So, it's talking about how in some films, religion is a substantial part of the film, but in some films, it just boiled down to a trope. It's just here's the symbol,
pastiche.
Here's the symbol, here's the icon, and that's the only weight that it carries. And it specifically talked about the fog, about how the fog subverts that, because in that movie, the church is not a place of sanctuary. The priest has been complicit by hiding the gold and the secret for all these years.
So that's sins of the father, not the actual priest.
But no, the priest was actually complicit. He knew the gold was there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he knew the gold was there, and he had the diary.
Oh, okay.
So,
which is a smart way of kind of going, instead of swinging one way or the other, going down that middle road, which doesn't often get hit.
Yeah.
So it's clever that way.
Those are our reading recommendations for this evening.